Hampton Court, the Paranormal Palace. As we've seen, Hampton Court Palace is already the ghostly home to several of King Henry VIII's wives, but they are not the only phantom residents. Another figure, often seen around the corridors leading to the state apartments and floating around Clock Court, is a woman in grey. Given that this Grey Lady's spectre has been sighted since the 16th century, we could argue that she is the original Grey Lady. The figure is seen, sometimes as little more than a pale shadow walking with purpose whilst carrying a candle. It's clear that this ghost feels like she has somewhere to be. She is widely believed to be the ghost of Sybil Penn, who served as a trusted servant under 4 separate Tudor monarchs, and was even the wet nurse of Edward VI. Sybil was also known to be a master embroiderer. Her skills with the spinning wheel were unrivalled, and many of the elaborate costumes worn by the Tudors, we see in paintings, would have had Sybil's needlework in them. Ever since her passing, people have also heard the distinctive sounds of a spinning wheel, as though being worked furiously coming from behind a wall in one of the Grace and Favour apartments. In 1829, while undergoing renovations, an old spinning wheel was found in a bricked-up room. It was argued that it was Sybil's, so the wheel was taken and buried alongside her in Hampton Church, although this did little to stop the phantom sounds. Sybil died at Hampton Court Palace in 1562. She had been tending to Elizabeth I, who had contracted smallpox, and she too caught the disease. The Queen recovered from her illness, but sadly Sybil did not. It's believed that over 50 individual spirits haunt Hampton Court Palace, making it one of the most haunted of the royal residences, and back in Victorian England, the palace marketed itself to tourists almost exclusively on its ghostly reputation. Famed Victorian writer William Holden Hunt described the palace as a world invisible or half-known, where imagination and tradition vie in bringing forth strange noises and mysterious presences. With a building of this age, regular maintenance works essential. Works in 1871 uncovered the skeletons of 2 men in a cloister near Fountain Court. After much investigation, these skeletons were identified as belonging to 2 unknown men who had died around the time of the English Civil War. Despite a thorough investigation, no one could account for who the men were or why they were hastily buried in such an unlikely place. They were both given a proper burial, and then something curious happened. An elderly resident of one of the Grace and Favour apartments began telling everyone, and anyone who would listen, that she had had her first decent night's sleep in decades. Ever since moving into the palace, she had been complaining that the ghosts of 2 men were keeping her awake every single night. She had found them exhausting to deal with, especially as she felt she could only see them. But once the skeletons were uncovered and buried on holy ground, peace. The resident wrote this in her diary. That stupid board of works has at last found the 2 wretched men who've been haunting me for years. In 2000, psychologist Richard Wiseman conducted an experiment at Hampton Court Palace. He hypothesized that ghosts and the paranormal are all tricks of the mind. His experiment, he hoped, would prove his hypotheses. He gathered 2 groups of volunteers. Half of the participants were believers in the paranormal and were informed of the ghost stories associated with the palace. The other half were self-identified skeptics. They were asked to explore the palace on their own without being told of the legends. Wiseman anticipated that his group of believers would have experiences in the palace, as they were psychologically in a state where they were expecting to have them. He also expected that his skeptics would report no such paranormal encounters. Weissman's results, when collated, were not exactly what he was expecting. While his believers did report more experiences than the non-believers, the difference in the number of experiences reported was not statistically significant, and to his surprise, over half of his control group of skeptics reported an encounter. While this does not definitely prove the reality of the paranormal, let alone that anything is going on at the palace, it certainly adds weight to the argument that there is definitely something strange going on.